we talked about this quite a bit in different areas where you have these things that sort of come through into our realm, hang out and do things in our realm, and actually feed off of things here, and then go back to sort of this in-between realm where you can't see them.
We've got some very, very bizarre claims of things that seem to be exactly like skinwalkers. There's something called a Turingat or a Turingate, where these are spirits that inhabit the frozen tundra, caught between realms of living and dead.
Electrical vibrational energy pulsing, just really intense energy, and they have this like aspect of them that is sinister. It's like their basic nature. It's really strange to remote view some things that have the basic nature of being sinister, and it's a normal thing to be.
Since 1970, more than 16,000 people have disappeared from Alaska, with some putting that number at 20,000. This is a massive number for such a sparsely populated state. It's over double the national average. Is it just the volatile weather in Alaska and hard living conditions causing this, or is there something more nefarious going on? Alaska's paranormal activity ranges from sightings in the sky to the strangest creatures known, passed down verbally over generations in the Inuit culture. The sightings and stories of these strange beings span from Greenland on the far east coast all the way to Alaska. Even more curious than that, the description of these beings seem to have strange, identical counterparts all across the world. How could a culture so far removed be seeing things that we have names for in other parts of the world? Is there any evidence that these creatures of myth could be real? Get ready to have your world turned upside down by the end of this episode. John, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
This is a weird one.
Yeah, this is a weird one.
Not only does the Inuit and just Alaskan native cultures have the strangest accounts of beings, creatures, animals, whatever you want to call them, but we've just got like beings I've never even heard of anywhere. I mean,
Right.
like there is this one thing called the Aklut, which is a half wolf, half orca that people are finding wolf tracks leading to the ocean. And if you see those, it's one of these things. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, okay. This goes into a really weird area because it's also goes into Nanook,
Oh
right?
yeah. So
So,
Nanook is the master, like the king of bears up there, right?
right,
Of polar bears, rather.
right, right. So, I mean, there's like all sorts of stories of Nanook. I think you know some of those stories. But Nanook was some being, some creature that would also sometimes help humans. I can't recall. Like
Yeah,
sometimes,
basically, he decided if hunters deserved success in finding and hunting bears and punished violations of hunting taboos.
right, exactly, right. So most people out there believe that Nanook and Aklut and these types of creatures are they're mythological, trying to explain something that they perceive in their environment, turning it into a story. And mythology is really interesting. You know, some some of these myths do come from a way to explain the environment in a way that's kind of exciting, so that the stories are remembered through time because it's verbal, word of mouth storytelling. And there's no like subtext to say things like, hey, you know, this is about the sun rising and falling every day, but we've just put it in the context of gods or something, right?
A story, yeah,
A
right.
story, right? And then you have the myths that are Well, they're specifically referring to some creature or some type of event that is a real thing. Especially when you get to the more bizarre ones, it's actually what I'm finding is that the more bizarre and darker ones are real, like they're real
Yeah,
creatures.
hard to make that up.
Right, right. It's hard to make that up. But then you have this whole other category. And I don't think this category is really known about by people in general because it gets very esoteric. But we see this with remote viewing on some of them. So in the case of Aklut and Nanook, what we have here specifically is what the collective consciousness of the people has created. It's a fully
Oh.
real thing, but it's been created by a group of people. And this is basically created by seeing something, then generating the idea of what this thing is over time, so that a whole population of people believe in its existence. And then from there, this gives the power of creation to a life form that's both etheric and 3D at the same time, which can become completely autonomous of the creators. And you have words for these things like a tulpa or an egregore or a god form, which this, well, like Nanook falls into the category of a god form. It's a culturally created autonomous being, right? Then you have Aklut, which is more of an egregore, which again, it's the same thing. It's just like of a lesser status or lesser kind of
Power almost.
power, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what we see with at least these two is that this was originally created by the humans. And people just don't understand how powerful group consciousness is and what groups think. So when you have like the whole world, the United States, people who think in terms of dark entities invading the planet, you create that because your imagination, what you're told, what you begin to concoct in your mind, creates the thing. We're creators. Us humans are creators, and that is a powerful, good, and also very dangerous thing when we don't understand it. And I don't even know if the Inuit people understand what they have created with their group consciousness. But it is a fully real thing now, 100% real. That would be much like what people would think about as a cryptid now, right? Well, let's go see if we can
Wow.
find this thing when it was originally created as like a tulpa or a god form.
We're just getting started in this episode, but we're going to be getting back into some of this bizarre stuff too. But before we do, there's some really strange claims of actual previous inhabitants of the land that we need to cover because it it mixes with all kinds of things, including giants and little people and all kinds of stuff. Now, the Tunit were reportedly the first inhabitants of the Alaskan lands. They're apparently taller and stronger than the Inuit. They can carry, it's said that they can carry a seal on their back. They're so strong. Seals can be like 500 or 600 pounds, right? That they can outrun caribou. Now they were also known as another name, this name called the Dorset people. What makes this interesting is that there have been 169 ancient human specimens found of the Dorset or the Tunit people. Now, you have some sources saying that they were much taller. Some seem, basically to say that they're much taller, they're much thicker, and some say that they're short and thick or the same size, and they're just much thicker and broader than a normal human. But either way, they were pretty strong people. Now, these people who lived in the north before the Inuit, uh, they spoke very simple languages, sometimes referred to as Kutak or even baby talk. So it was almost like a super simple form of language. Now, these Tunit were apparently very peaceful people, just minded their own business, and they preferred to be kind of left alone. Artifacts of the Tunit can be found all over the north. Now, um, if you pissed them off, they became a pretty bad enemy to have because they were so strong. but generally they just tried to stay away from humans. And if you were trying to speak to them, you had to speak much simpler and slower, and not use big words in order to communicate with them.
Right. Yeah. There was like I think I read one story whereas if you made them mad or hurt one of them, they would tell you to go away. Go away.
Pacifists.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, we were. I mean, we did a look into that. These people, and a lot of people would claim them to be giants, but they don't really know. Like what we got was that they weren't necessarily giant people. They were just very broad. They were like they were wide, very wide. Didn't necessarily get them as being much
Like
taller, much shorter. I would say,
wide.
like if anything, they'd be a little shorter.
Okay, so but wide like the Maori are wide, or wide like in a way that we haven't really
Wide,
seen?
like in a way that we haven't really seen,
Really?
right?
Hmm.
And incredibly strong and very private and still in existence, still around. It's just that like they just don't get involved with what others are doing. So it's kind of like a recluse. They were sort of like recluse race of humans. And when you get to the north again, it's like there's so much land, like just unbelievable amounts of land that you won't find another human in which these beings, people-ish things will live. But they weren't like paranormal, they weren't dimensional, they didn't seem to have a link to the past of giants in general. So I don't know, like I don't know where they came from ultimately. They're very 3D. They weren't like traversing dimensions or anything like that. They just
Right.
seem to be a race, some kind of race of people up there.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
So they apparently disappeared from history because, as the Inuit and the natives started to, um, kind of discover new hunting ground, instead of the Tunit people fighting for that hunting ground, they would just move. They would just move further away, and just like that, it is said in this culture that they disappeared from history. So it's very probable that they just still live in places that are harder to get to and that most people you know, don't live in. Okay, yeah, and now there's another race that reportedly lived up there, and this is where it starts to get, I don't know, downright bizarre to me, because I don't know how the Nazis could pop up in more of our episodes just randomly. Now, this group is called the Thule, that survived where the Tunit basically disappeared from history. And what's honestly most amazing is that they were using iron for tools and hunting in Alaska. They practiced a process called epimetallurgy that made the metal stronger, harder, and had more efficient points. They're believed to have had militias. They wore Chinese style slat armor made from animal bones. And they may have even developed and designed a bow and arrow that came from Mongolian influences.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, okay, so
Yeah. But okay, this
weird.
is where it kind of gets crazy, because in in Germany there was a society called the Thule Gesellschaft. It was the Thule Society. When I heard that the name of them was called the Thule, immediately I was like, okay, that's super weird, because the Thule Society was an occult society within, you know, the Nazi Germany era. But now we've got an actual Thule people traveling around with advanced metal, right? And we know that the Nazis were going over to Tibet to look for the Aryan race that had basically hidden itself in the tunnels below the Himalayas.
Right. Right. That's crazy. That's a crazy connection there.
Yeah,
I don't know what to make of that.
I
That's
don't
interesting.
either. It kind of blew my mind though, because it's like, okay, now we've got a bizarre, like, I also, why are people not putting this together as well?
Right.
It's just like there's more handles here to hold on to than I think people realize,
Right.
you know?
Right.
But anyway, I found that completely fascinating, especially when it gets to the metal. So, how it was explained that the Thule disappeared is that they had less and less places to develop their iron. They weren't finding iron in those areas. So, they moved and migrated to places where they could create the iron that they were using for all of their tools. And also, it said that um, some pandemics basically wiped a bunch of these folks out, not ever having these types of illnesses or influenzas, you know, in their areas. They just kind of like passed away due to them,
Right.
you know?
Right.
Now,
Right.
also, we're talking about these Tunit people being giants, and we've got in Inuit culture a lot of references to giants, which they feel like their traces are still visible on Earth, and in their culture, they're called the Inuit Pasajuit. I may have pronounced that wrong. Okay, now they say that some of these are malevolent, some of them are gentle, and that some of them were so big that they would mistake polar bears for foxes and whales for seals, like massive beings, right?
Right.
Yeah, and it seems like the males are larger and less common than the females. Like you're much more likely to see a female, and very little is known about the males. And perhaps that's because no one has ever survived to talk about them. Like the giants are just taking them out.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the pretty common story. What was that one story with Magellan? Who the claim was that he found a race of giant people down in Argentina, down in the tundra or something, living down there, and he captured one, put it in a cage on a ship, and tried to bring it back. Tried to trick them. They were also kind of simplistic. They didn't understand a lot of things that Magellan had with him. But yeah, I think it's interesting that story coming from Magellan, whom we idolize to a degree as being a great explorer.
Yeah, why
And
would he lie about that?
right, why would he lie? Who knows? I mean, I don't think he did because you have other cultures throughout the world that talk about the giants, and like when we get to the giant stories coming from native cultures across the planet, um, in that sort of mythology construct. Okay, so it's taken as a myth, right? It's taken as a myth by modern. That in that construct falls into the area where there are other beings that are not created by the collective consciousness, that come from somewhere else or came from somewhere else or were here beforehand. And the giants were one of those. The giants that have been found all over the place are one of those races that used to be here. So, yeah, it's like, when I hear stories of giants coming out of Alaska, yeah, absolutely.
For those of you at home that are listening right now, if you want to hear some actual legit crazy information about giants, watch our Malta series because we go through, oh man, all kinds of stuff in that series, and that series from start to finish just kept getting crazier and crazier. So anyway, these some elders warned that female giants will grab people and carry them away, and they're amatuks, which those basically the bags that they have. And if you ever see a giant, you should crouch down, remain very still, and your best chance of escape is actually to avoid being seen. Yeah,
Yeah.
which makes sense. All right, now before we get into some really really crazy stuff that we found, there's a few other stuff that I want to talk about that's just really bizarre here that seem to match descriptions in other areas. And one is this thing called adlet, or another thing called an amarok. And the adlet basically are a race of people said to have the lower body of dogs and the upper body of humans,
Hmm.
like a werewolf. Typically, they believed to be the offspring of an Inuit woman and a dog brought about through an unnatural mating.
It's like a dog man.
Um, it's something like that, or like some type of werewolf dogman thing.
That's
Um,
weird. But
so
it
yeah,
has the body, it has the upper body of a human?
well,
Huh.
think about it. When you think of what the descriptions of Dogman, right? You have the upper body that's more human-like, even with fingers and hands, but then the lower body is more canine, but they're still
Right.
on two legs,
Right.
right? So could be.
Right. Wonder if
Um,
they fight with Bigfoot up there. Have you heard those stories like where Dogman is fighting Bigfoot? I mean, there's kind of a few of those things. It makes me wonder. Um, you have like what seems to be more predominance of Bigfoot up there rather than Dogman in general.
I found that we've got some very, very bizarre claims of things that seem to be exactly like skinwalkers. There's something called a Turingat or a Turingate, where these are spirits that inhabit the frozen tundra, caught between realms of living and dead. And they possess these otherworldly powers. And these spirits are known to be very unpredictable. They appear in howling winds and disappear just as quickly. They're malevolent. They enjoy tormenting humans, according to some claims. They have the ability to manipulate elements. Inuit people control the Turingat or the Turingate with their shamans, and they use their powers for protection or even divine justice by turning these things on to things
Hmm.
that where there needs to be justice had, right? Now, shamans and according to their legends and lore, the shamans and Turingats have long battled in their you know, I guess they seek to subdue the Turingots and bring peace to their people. Now, what's weird is these creatures can shapeshift, allowing them to appear both as animals or humans and can take on a variety of forms and can be called upon by shamans, which sound exactly like skinwalkers in the
Right.
native culture.
Right. It sounds like a tulpa as well. And it really sounds like a tulpa. Like that's but then you have the whole skinwalker thing that is a practice that shamans will go into. You've got to wonder how much of this is the conscious creation of another being that traverses will exist mostly in a different dimension. I don't know if I want to say fourth, but um, and is able to influence the third. Yeah, that's kind of a curious thing because in the shamanic realm, you're always dealing with that kind of stuff, that other dimensional realm thing in order to influence the third dimensional realm. So honestly, it's like these categories. It's like I think this is probably in the tulpa category.
Yeah, it's hard to know what came first, the spirit or
Yeah.
the humans putting their mind on this stuff because over on the east coast of Canada, around Newfoundland and Labrador, there is a range of mountains called the Torngat Mountains, which are apparently named after this. They're known as the Devil's Mountain, and they're said to be the home of these spirits. You and I have talked about like the superstition mountains, and
Right.
oftentimes these things are named these things for a reason. You know,
Right.
it's
So
just
that
it's
might pull it out of the
strange.
tulpa category and just this other race of strange beings that exist in another dimension that they're trying to control.
Yeah, that's just super weird. And then also there's this thing called the Taraksuit, which are known as by the Inuits as shadow people. And we've heard of shadow people all around the world. I mean, people talking about these things. They're, apparently live in a world like our own, but their world, however, is beyond our senses. This is what they say. They're almost never seen, but sometimes when conditions are right, the Turok suit can be heard. Um, what's strange is it sounds like they're like in the upside down or something. Like some of
Yeah.
these things.
Well, that's that the astral plane that is like an exact but different, slightly different rendition of ours.
Yeah.
There is that. It's like when you go astral travel, there's like your room, but things are moved around a little bit differently, and
Mm,
shadow people are there in that place. It's like
right.
another dimension.
Yeah, and they say that these things will disappear into the ground and vanish. And that some Inuit have crossed over into this shadow world, but few have ever returned to tell us what it's like.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
upside down. Yeah.
Right. Right, exactly. It's like one of those things. It's like a lot of people always ask me like, "Oh, if you see a dimensional portal, would you enter it?" And I'm like, "No." Like I would have you have no idea knowing whether or not you'd ever be able to come back. I mean, that's just even if you stuck your head in there and it looked amazing, you could get stuck in a realm that you're not supposed to end up in, and it's a dangerous thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Good advice. That well, I mean, that's the thing of this is that people often think of these things in such black and white terms, right? Where it's only one place, but there's all these different places. As we've seen with remote viewing and all the shows that we've talked about this stuff, like different ones lead to different places. Most all of the time, the ones that do come back were really praying to get back, even if they were in another really nice place. It just is so different. But it's not the same thing. And sometimes, even on some of them, people just get lost in some sort of in between space that we've seen, like where they're just in some kind of energetic washing machine forever. So, yeah,
Energetic washing machine. Oh
yeah.
man, that's good. All right, so finally, this just really really bizarre claims of vampire like creatures.
I am Dracula. I bid you welcome.
Now this one we're about to cover has to be the strangest, and I was pretty shocked to hear your response on this. It's called the Kalupalik. Now, when there's many of them, I guess it's pronounced Kalupalit. Now, these are kind of similar to these things called kappa from Japanese folklore,
Hmm.
or maybe even more distantly related to the siren or the mermaid. Now, these are described as human like beings having greenish skin with long hair, webbed fingers, and very long fingernails. It lives in the sea under the ice. This thing hums to entice children to come closer to the water and wears an amatik, which is a parka worn by Inuit women to hold a child against the back, and a built-in baby pouch just below the hood. That's what this thing is, right? So it's kind of like a crackhead mermaid wearing a
Right.
parka that basic so it sounds totally made up. You know, I
Right.
mean, parents and elders would basically you can imagine them telling this story to children, basically don't go too close to the ice. And they'd see these kids just fall into the ice and it was the Kalup Palik that took them,
Right. It's like
right?
the boogeyman. Go to
Yeah,
sleep,
something like
otherwise
that.
the boogeyman's going to get you. Except in my mom's case, it was always the mummy. The mummy will get you. I don't know
Yeah,
where that came
yeah,
from.
right. And this is where it gets a little bit darker though, is that some of these legends refer to the Kaluppalit as immortal, which in order to sustain their immortality, they need to basically feed on children, which gives them this never ending life. Now, it depends on children to keep them young, to keep their skin green and their hair like special. That's literally quote
Special.
unquote special. I don't know what that means.
With a beautiful sheen.
Yeah, something like this. Now
Huh.
they're supposedly half human and half sea creature. And as you know, I heard one interesting account. It was like this animation that the Inuits made for their children to teach them about this thing. They say, as you grow old, she grows younger, and her eyes never blink, watching always for the next child to show up at shore.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I just would have thought this. So I want to kind of want to know what you think, but hearing this whole thing at first, I was like, this is just some made up thing because there needs to be some kind of explanation for why these kids are falling into the ice, right? But when it got to the part where they were being very specific about it feeding on children, some of them are taking the child back to its cave to freeze them for eternity or to just for food later on. Um, this is really, really weird. Like, that's a very specific thing to make up is what I'm trying to say, you know?
Right. Right. Well, it's like some of the stuff that we look at, we have to like try to understand whether it is like the boogeyman. I mean, you know, I don't know if the boogeyman is a good reference point, but but it is in regard to, it's a story to get kids to do something that, you know, they don't want to do. Otherwise, this is going to get you, which falls into the myth category. But then you have, you know, the category of well, another realm interacting, like the shadow people, another realm interacting with our realm, where you have, and we've seen this over and over, we talked about this quite a bit in different areas, where you have these things that sort of come through into our realm, hang out and do things in our realm, and actually feed off of things here, and then go back to sort of this in between realm where you can't see them. And so we see these things as being from that other realm, and as not a Tulpa-ish type character, not as a myth to keep kids away from the breaking ice, which is dangerous, you know, but used for that purpose, but as something fully real, something fully defined in a physical and a paraphysical sense. And what we see is like these things, they seem to like to go around areas where there's habitation, especially if it comes right up to the water. And they like to have this, like there's this aspect of chaos that they like, which has to do with like broken ice fields, and it has to do with like structures and activity close to shore. And so they will, it seems to be that they'll hang around in those areas, and they're typically in the water and underneath, like underneath the water. And what we see is this sort of like energetic vortex type situation that they come out of, that they will come out of. So it's not like they spend all their time in the physical. They're not just a purely physical thing. And then they have this sort of electrical vibrational energy pulsing, just really intense energy. And they have this like aspect of them that is sinister. It's like their basic nature. It's really strange to remote view some things that have the basic nature of being sinister, and it's a normal thing to be. Like I'm going to suck the blood out of you, and I think it's funny, and I like it, and I also like need it. It's a weird vibration. It's a very weird
Yeah.
vibration. And we see that with some of these things. I think that sort of information that we have is that it's got slightly bigger eyes than what people have portrayed it as. Um, and what we see is that it's like, actually, this was referred to in one of the sessions where a remote viewer was like reminded, obviously the remote viewers are blind, they don't know that they're viewing this, but the remote viewer was reminded of that one image of the beast from Seven Shoots, which was a dog man carrying, so somebody took a photograph of what appears to be a dog man carrying like a little dog or a
Mm.
little creature, presumably to eat it later on. It's a very disconcerting photograph, but
Yeah.
that was referred to in some of the data as, it's like that kind of a situation, because these beings will come up and grab something and carry it away, right, and be holding it and carrying it away, much like that photograph, which is very, very, very creepy, very creepy. So
Mm.
yeah, I'd say these beings are something that traverse dimensions back and forth in order to sustain themselves.
You know what's strange is that this is not the only instance of a creature in Inuit culture that feeds on humans. There's also something called the Tamatuyuk, which is some type of vampire that's apparently takes human form to gain the trust of the baby. And specifically, it said that it kills it by piercing its head with a needle or a straw and then sucking the blood.
That's crazy. So it gains the trust of a baby. That's very bizarre. It's like some part of its sinister plan to gain the trust.
But it's a
That's just so
vampire.
weird. Yeah,
It's
it's a
like,
vampire. I mean,
that's
because a
really
baby
weird.
is helpless. Like, why would you need to gain the trust of a baby before sucking its brains out with a straw or
I
its blood
don't
out with a straw? It's
I
like,
really don't know.
you don't have to do that to a human with a gun, yeah, but not a baby. A baby you just take. So that's a bizarre story.
Yeah, and then there's this, it's called a mahaha, and it's called that because this thing is a psychotically laughing, evil smiling, long fingernailed being.
Yeah,
and and they say that, it terrorized parts of the Arctic long ago.
right.
It's thin, sinewy, it's like an ice blue in color, cold to the touch being. And the
Right.
Mahaha's eyes are white and piercing, and they peer through the long, stringy hair that hangs over its face. It's extremely strong and is always seen barefooted and almost naked. Creeps up on unsuspecting Inuits. When it gets close enough, this is super weird. And this part of it, this lore makes me think, okay, this entire thing is fake. But here it is. When it gets close enough, the Mahaha delights in tickling its victims to death with its sharp, vicious fingernails attached to its long, bony fingers.
I'm telling you,
Tickling it to death.
when we remote view these things, they're very stable in their maniacalness. Is all I can say. It's like if you remote view a human is who does this kind of stuff, who's just psychotic. If you remote view them, they're extremely unstable, like going back and forth, jumping around mentally, emotionally, all this stuff. When we remote view these things, they're extremely stable in their maniacal attitudes, in their just crazed psychoticness, extremely stable in that it is their psychology, that it is their psychology. So while it sounds crazy to us when you remote view these things, hey, that's like the
Their
standard.
everyday life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyday life for them. And the Mahaha to me seems to be a like a land rendition of the Kalukpalut being, right? That takes
Mm.
snatches kids from under the ice. It seems to be like very much related to that thing. Yeah, because it was doing the same stuff, looked the same way, had the same energy. It has this like very etheric zappiness to it energetically, like electrical vibration. Not fun to view.
Yeah. That doesn't sound fun to view at all. That's crazy. So, and now we've got like sea spirits and land spirits that are stalking things that don't actually, I mean, as far as we know, these are very different from the things that we hear about in the woods here in the forests of North America, where you've got these things called rakes or wendigos, that the natives called them. We've got something else that's in the tundra that's unexplainable.
Yeah, something totally different. I mean, this just could be like because there's just not a lot of humans up there. It hasn't disturbed entry points for this kind of stuff. And I mean, it just sounds insane to most people out there, but our world is just we have so many entry and exit points that other beings can come through, and all of the anomalous things that people see is not just something that happens in their head. So I think up there it's just you're out in the woods wilderness, and these have not been disturbed. So you have things coming through, a lot of geomagnetic anomalies up there as well. When you get to Alaska and that just Canada up there, lots of geomagnetic anomalies like the Alaska Triangle, all the strange compass deviations that happen up there, and that correlated with people disappearing and strange phenomena happening, as well as different cryptids that have been spoken about by the native population over millennia. It's all related. All of it's related.
We're talking about genuinely uncharted territory here,
Yeah.
like the most uncharted territory in the entire world, being up in the northern areas. Very interesting. Well, you guys at home, we covered a lot of the most interesting creatures that we found in Alaska. We want to know what you guys think. So please leave us a comment below and let us know if this was helpful in trying to understand some of these strange cryptids in the northern territories, especially that of Alaska. And John, thanks so much for being here today. And if you guys have other questions or you want us to specifically look into certain things, definitely remember to leave us a comment below. We'll work it into our current list of things that we're covering. And yeah, we hope you guys thought this episode was as out of this world as we did. Talk to you soon.